Thank you, everybody. Today in our Justice Conference, we have so many directions that we could go. We're not going to go in every direction today, but we are going to tackle some things direct and head-on, and Bishop Harvey is going to help us do that. For those of you that don't know who Bishop Harvey is, which is probably most of you at this point, but he will become a dear friend of yours very, very soon. Bishop Harvey pastored in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Wisconsin is close to my heart since I was born there. But so Milwaukee, Wisconsin, for many years, he's the president of our movement's National Black Fellowship, but he is also now one of our executive presbyters. What that means is that everything wrong with our movement is his fault at this point, is what that means. So he's only been there a short period of time, and he is, what that means, so you understand that he is one of our overseers, ultimately. He's one of my overseers, and that's very, very important for you to understand as he comes and shares with us today. So we didn't just find some random person to talk about this, okay? So we have much to learn, much to grow from. This is in the context of our movement, our family, our team, our tribe. This is really important stuff for us to tackle here today. And we've been on this journey as a church. And for those of you that have been around for a few years, you understand that this journey has not been easy. It has been complicated, and we are still moving forward in this. This is what we've been called to do. Preach good news to the poor, healing for the broken, freedom for the captive, and justice for the oppressed. And we need to be front and center on this, because if we don't do justice, nobody in our city will do justice. We do justice so that our city can have justice, so our cities can have justice. So why don't you welcome Bishop Harvey as he comes and shares today.
Thank you, Pastor Kurt. Thank you. Well, I was his friend until he said, all the problems are mine. I was tracking with you. But Jen straightened it out and said, I didn't create them, they're mine, right? And I'm there to fix them. Yeah, not my fault, but I'm there to fix them. Wow, it's so great to be here. I really feel, and I'm not flattering you all, but I feel like I'm home, that I found a family, I found a tribe. I love being around real people. I have a problem with religious people. So if that's you, I probably won't be talking to you at lunch today, all right? I'm going to be looking for some real folks, some people who are ex, because I'm an ex, a whole lot of stuff. I'm not here to share my testimony, but we got a lot of exes. I used to be, but I'm not anymore by God's grace. I mean, God uses those people, right? You think about Peter, right? He would cuss you out and cut your ear off in one stroke. Moses was a murderer. Rahab was a harlot. I was going to say something else from the streets, but God he just takes those kind of people and redeems them. And we're all just a testimony of that. So can we just give God praise for what he's doing and what he's done in our lives? Amen. And Pastor Kurt, thank you. Jen, thank you for being here. Thanks for the hospitality I've received already. I want to tell you all a story. So Pastor Tanisha yelled out the word justice today, and that's what we're here to talk about. A story about mercy and justice. The Bible tells us in Psalm 89, verse 14, that justice is the foundation of God's throne. This is a powerful scripture. Justice is the foundation of God's throne. And mercy and truth, they reside with him. And so mercy and justice one day were playing by the riverside. And all of a sudden they heard this splash. And this man was floating down the river just trying to, just breathe. He was drowning. And so mercy jumped in and swam towards the man, struggled, but pulled the man out of the water, got him on the side of the shore. By that time, justice came over, and they were just trying to help resuscitate the man. Then they heard another splash. Another man was in the water, and he's now floating down the river stream, and he's panting, trying to get his breath and trying to survive. And this time, mercy and justice, they both leave this man, and they jump into the water, swim, pull the man ashore, pull him on the bank, and try to revive him, bring him back to life. And would you know, there's another splash. And a third man is in that same river stream, and he's drowning, and Mercy jumps in, starts swimming, turns around and looks, and all he sees is Justice's back, because Justice is running away from Mercy at that time. And Mercy says, "Hey, Justice, where are you going? I need you." Justice says, "I'm going upstream to find out who's throwing these people in the water." That's a picture of Justice. Justice does something. Justice seeks to identify the root problem and fix it, to correct the wrongs. And I want to let you know that Justice has a name, and his name is Jesus. Justice is not a political term. It's not a sociological term. Justice is Jesus. Justice is Jesus' idea. It comes from him. It's the foundation of his throne. And he is all about bringing restoration and fixing broken things. And I love what Pastor Kurt says. I know the foundation of this church is born out of Isaiah 61, that the Spirit of the sovereign God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. That's what justice does. It brings good news to the poor. What's good news to the poor? You don't have to be poor no more, right? Justice has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives, release those from darkness who are prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow upon them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of the spirit of... See, that's justice. Yeah. It's fixing something that's wrong. It's putting things in order that are missing. And that's good news. Jesus is justice. Yes, he is. Micah 6:8 tells us that this is what God requires of us. It's really simple. We've kind of made being a follower of Jesus Christ so complex, and it's really simple. The Old Testament says it's this: act justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. Go ahead and do that. In the New Testament, he says, love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Vertical. Horizontal. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Do these two things, you fulfill the whole law. Old Testament and New Testament. Boom, right there. You want to know how to be a follower of Christ? Memorize those two scriptures. Go ahead and do them. You're on your way to heaven, and you're taking a whole lot of people with you. And you're going to bring heaven on earth. You're going to bring justice wherever you go. But when we look at these two concepts, when we look at justice, we find ourselves in a conundrum right now in society where political pundits and cultural critics have just hijacked what it means to practice justice, to do justice, to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. And what we find is that they're pitting us against one another. And they're trying to make us choose. Are you social justice or biblical justice? Which side are you on? Because if you're social justice, you're just giving the person a sandwich to eat. And you're not giving them Jesus. But if you're biblical justice, you're just, concerned about their soul and whether or not they go to heaven, but you're not meeting the needs of the people. So which one are you? I reject that premise. I believe that God is telling us that we are to do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with our God, love him, love our neighbor. It's all of the above. It's not one or the other. It's both and. Justice is justice. Whatever adjective you put in front of it, justice is the noun. All right? Justice is the verb. Justice is what we are called to do. I want to give you that definition, let you know it's upon that foundation that I'm teaching from today. I also want to let you know that I need your prayers. I need your help. I was sharing with Pastor Kurt and staff recently. I said, hey, I'm not an expert in justice. I'm not an expert in this topic. But I do pray that, and ask your prayers for what Isaiah 50:4 declares. The Lord has given me the tongue of the learned, that I should know how to speak a word in season to him who is weary. He awakens me morning by morning. He awakens my ear to hear as the learned. So my aim today is not to stand before you as an expert who's, flew in from Milwaukee and I'm going to just make things right in Lynn and you're never going to, need Pastor Kurt to teach you another message because you have heard it all from Bishop Walter Harvey. No, that's not true. If I succeed today, I'll be two things for you. I'll be a counselor and I'll be a teacher. Those of you that have been to a counselor before, counselors don't always just give you advice and 5 keys, go ahead and do this, take these 3 steps, and poof, you won't need me again. Counselors, they listen. Counselors ask a lot of questions, and counselors bring the answers to your problems out of you, right? And so I'm not here, I don't know the city of Lynn. I don't know the greater Boston area. You do. You know the problems and the solutions are here by the grace of God. And so I want to be a counselor, but I also want to be a good teacher. I was talking to my new friend Nixon, who's a teacher. And there may be other teachers here today, but, teachers are different than gurus, right? Gurus are experts. Gurus, they got a podcast, they got a website, they got they got flyers and brochures. I ain't talking about nobody, I'm just talking. So if that's you, just keep looking at me and nobody will know, all right? But gurus, they've got 5 steps, 10 keys, right? Do these 3 things. Gurus are experts, but teachers are different. And Mark Wolin is a great author. He wrote a book called It Didn't Just Start With You. And the foundation of the book is making us aware of trauma in our lives and know that the trauma that we're experiencing, it didn't just start with us. Many times it's generational. It's stuff that we inherited. And he says this about the difference between gurus. He says, gurus give us themselves and then they give us a system. So when they give us themselves, they're giving us their personality, they're giving us their charisma, they're giving us their brochures and cards and their bio, and then they give us a system. And people pay hundreds of dollars for gurus. But teachers are different. Teachers present a truth, and then they leave you to yourself. So pray for me that I be a good teacher and a good counselor today. It didn't just start with you. When we talk about the issue of race and prejudice and bias and justice as the foundation, we have to do it I believe, in the context of our family history. Because family is our story. We cannot divorce ourselves from history. We can't, and we're seeing that happen in the cultural and the political realm today where, certain theories are being attacked that's trying to really strip us from our history, strip us from things that we've inherited. They're in the world today. So we cannot expunge from the inside of us family and history. Peter Scazzaro, who's a wonderful pastor and author and teacher from Queens, New York, wrote numerous books on the topic of emotionally healthy spirituality. He reiterates this point and he says, Jesus might be in your heart, but grandpa's in your bones. You can't take your background out of you. You are who you are because of other folks who came before you, and they're in you too. Yeah, when you get married, you married mama, daddy, grandma, grandpa, Aunt June, Uncle Leroy, all of them. They're in you. We're gonna take a deeper journey today also into culture. Because when we understand our inheritance, we have to look back, but we also have to look out and we have to understand culture. Now, culture is what we do, right? It's the food we eat. It's the music that we listen to. It's the art that we create. It's the clothes that we wear. It's the traditions that we have for the holidays. It's a language. It's manner. All of that is culture. It's our way of life. It's how we do stuff. Amen. And I want to just give you this truth and then leave you to yourself. White culture does not set the standard for anything. not for beauty, not for intellect. It doesn't set the standard for excellence. Doesn't set the standard for what is the utopia of religious expression. But it is a dominant culture in America. It's not the only one. I like vanilla ice cream with some hot apple pie. But I can't eat vanilla ice cream all the time. Sometimes I might want some chocolate or some, Neapolitan where you get the vanilla, the chocolate, and the strawberry. Sometimes I might just want some chunky monkey, all right? Don't judge me, right? I like the chocolate with the banana and the mint chocolate chip, those two. I mean, sometimes you might want some sprinkles, some nuts, some caramel, some chocolate, maybe a cherry on top. And I believe that's how God created us, to understand that culture is important. But we have to just reject the myth and the notion that dominant white culture is the standard. But that's what we have, that's what we've grown up in America. Right? If you've been in America more than 2 weeks, you've already ingested. You've already ingested in your lungs, and you have become racialized. Because the foundation of our nation is race. We're going to go deeper and talk about that. My journey, I don't know if you all know this, but I'm black. I don't know if you knew that. I used to have a radio broadcast back in Milwaukee when I was senior pastoring. It was called Light for Today, and it was on for about 20 years. It would come on Sunday morning, it would come on weekday, and it was just excerpts of my sermon that were kind of edited. And I met a person in the grocery store one day, and we were talking about Jesus and the Bible, and I said, "Hey, yeah, I'm Walter Harvey." He said, "You're Walter Harvey? I listened to him on the radio. You're not him. He's a white man." They had never met me before, but they heard me on the radio, and they said, "This guy must be white." So I never really listened to myself and know what white sounds like, but they thought I was white. But I tell you, the day I discovered I was black when I was a freshman at Marquette University in Milwaukee. And I was sitting in the front row, kind of where Pastor Kurt is, in a theology class, Old Testament theology. And all the students behind me were white. And there was a black female sitting next to me, kind of right where Jen is sitting. And the professor was a Jewish rabbi. And he made a statement, and he said, Jesus was probably darker than you. And he pointed at me. That's the day I discovered I was black. And my first emotion was one of embarrassment. I was like, man, everybody knows I'm black. And I would have slid down under the seat, but I was already in the front row. I couldn't go anywhere. But that emotion of embarrassment quickly turned to a curiosity, which led to a pride. Not just in my ethnicity, but also in the grace of God. Because it was then that I discovered that I was in the heart and the mind of God as a black man long before I came to this class. That there was a history that I participated in theology and in Old Testament and in New Testament, in the genealogy of Jesus and in history. And so it opened up new horizons for me. I have many multi-ethnic friends, including a lot of white pastors in Milwaukee. And I asked my white friends this question. Remember, a teacher gives you truth and leaves you to yourself. I said to my white friend, Pastor Matt Erickson, I said, "Matt, when did you discover you were white?" He had never been asked that question before, and you probably never heard that question. When did you discover you were white? He thought about it. He said, "You know what? The day that I walked into a department store with my 2 African adopted children, and they walked in front of me, and immediately the security guard started following them but didn't pay any attention to me. That's the day I discovered I was white." I asked him another question. I said, "What do you like about being white?" He didn't have an answer. Because whiteness is a myth. Nobody's really white. Nobody's really black. Yeah, even though we use those terms to kind of categorize, white is, this is white and this is black. But we use that to kind of categorize ourselves. He asked me the question, hey, what do you like about being black? I said, oh, that's easy, man. I love, Motown. Come on, you got to have Stevie and Smokey. And, man, where would the world be without Motown? It'd be vanilla ice cream, right? Just every day. Just Nashville, country and western, pop and Bee Gees. Yes, you got to have some Motown. I say, man, I love the soul food. I love the swag. I'm married now. Now, I'm not lusting, but I love the curves that black women have. I'm telling you, black women got some curves, and some of my white sisters, y'all know what I'm talking about, right? They go out and they invest in themselves to get some curves. I ask the question of Hispanic people, they can answer it the same way. And I love the way we dance, and I love our swag, I love our food, But when white people give up their ethnicity for the sake of the privilege of being white, you also give up culture. You give up so much stuff that I pray that God would help us open up our eyes to see how that there really is one race, and it's the human race. Yes. That God didn't make race. He made ethnicity from one man. Yes. And when you think about it, that first man named Adam, one of the ancient definitions of the name Adam is red man. Red dirt. My daddy was from Georgia, mama was from Mississippi. Every time we go back down south, black people go south, white people go north. It's a reason for that. The Great Migration. Black people left the South in the 1910s up until about 1960 trying to escape the oppression of Jim Crow and mass lynching and just blatant, overt discrimination. And so they came to the North seeking better opportunities. But when I go down south, I see that red dirt. First time I went to Africa, man, I got off the plane and I saw people who looked like me, a majority. I was like, I'm home. I kneeled down and kissed the dirt. But it's red, brownish dirt. And I thought, man, God, you made man from the dust of the ground. He didn't make him from sand. Okay. I'm just giving you truth and leaving you to yourself. You know what the color of sand is, right? Made him from the dirt, breathed into him the breath of life, and he became a living soul. God made one race, it's the human race. Yes. And so we need to embrace this truth that regardless of where your ancestry lies, it may be in the indigenous, native, tribal people of this land. The city wasn't always called Lynn. It was probably called by the name of the tribe that was here long before Christopher Columbus got lost. Before he discovered America. It was long before he discovered America, right? There were some tribal people here. And so you may have ended up here that way, or you may have been part of that enslaved group of people that came on that transatlantic journey from Africa to the Caribbean to islands and eventually to what we now call America, or your ancestry might have come from the European continent across the Atlantic where the Lady Liberty greeted you at New York Harbor. Come on, welcome. Give me your tired. Give me your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free air, holding up that torch of liberty, saying, welcome to the land of opportunity, where you can fulfill the American dream. Your ancestors may have come from the Canadian border. They may have come across the southern border from Mexico. Or they may have come from across the Pacific, from an Asian island. However your ancestry got you here, Santa Maria, Pinta, whatever ship it was, we're in the same ship now. Amen. Amen. We're in the same ship now. And if you believe in Jesus, you're my brother, you're my sister. I'm your brother from another mother, you're my sister from another mister. right? It's the blood of Jesus Christ that has made us common, and we need each other. We're in this thing together, and we are better together. Ecclesiastes 3 tells us that two are better than one. We need each other. I love to watch Marvel comics, right? The Marvel series. And, you know, when I was growing up, you know, my hero was Thor. Blonde hair, Swedish, you know, European. I mean, there were no black Marvel comics. They might have been villains, but they weren't like the heroes, you know. But when Black Panther came, I can't wait till November 11th, y'all. I'm just going to Wakanda forever. I just can't, right? It's coming back. I can't wait. But when the Black Panther came, I was like, man, we finally got a black superhero. But notice the thing about these Marvel heroes, they all have individual powers and abilities. You know, Spider-Man, you know, Thor with the hammer, Wonder Woman with the lasso, you know, Superman, you know, can fly, Batman with all of his utility belt. But all by themselves, they get beat up by whatever the villain is trying to overtake the globe. But when they come together with all of their unique differences, that's a picture of the body of Christ. That's a picture of humanity and all of our differences coming together, how God can bring about his divine vision, a global, local vision of justice. I call it Glocal, global and local. God's dream, God's vision is one of justice. And the truth is, you know this better than I do, that Greater Boston has had numerous opportunities in the past and even in the present to demonstrate justice. To demonstrate it in a way that's powerful, in a way that's practical, and in a way that's perceptible. In other words, those who are poor, those who are blind, those who are incarcerated, those who are mourning, those who are captive can experience in perceptible ways. It makes a difference for them. Boston, a city of first, right? It's a city that was the epicenter for the abolitionist movement. It's a city where Frederick Douglass once called home. Lynn, a city he once called home, right? Pastor was telling me that his first book was written while he was here. A city of champions, a city where the first African-American basketball player, Chuck Cooper, played in the 1950s for the Boston Celtics. And then, of course, you know, the great Bill Russell with 11 rings. People often talk about Michael Jordan and LeBron, you know, who's the greatest. I say Bill Russell. I say he's the one that got 11 rings, right? You put LeBron and Michael together, they still don't have 11. Oh. A city of first. But it's also a city, a region with challenges. You know those challenges better than I do. But there was a time where Irish were not considered white. Right? There were caricatures of the Irish, you know, based on Protestant and Catholic history. In fact, one source says that the English, let me get this right. It's talking about the categorization and the history of race. That in the late 16th century until the 18th century, that the English had a long history of separating themselves from others and treating foreigners such as Irish as aliens. By the 17th century, their policies and their practices in Ireland had led to an image of the Irish as savages who were incapable of being civilized. Proposals to conquer the Irish and take over the land and use them as forced labor failed because of Irish resistance. Irish folk love to fight, man. That's a stereotype, but I know some of them do. They weren't going to be enslaved. They were not going to be colonized. And so it was then that many Englishmen turned their idea of colonization of the New World. They turned to the idea of colonization. And their attitudes towards Irish set the precedence for how they treat Native Indians, Native Americans, indigenous people, and later Africans. I was talking to my friend Tony. He was talking about the North Boston area and the South Boston area. Italians on the north and Irish on the south. You all know that history better than I do. But it's important to understand how we got to where we are today in order to determine a path for us going forward. There's a legacy here. There's a history and a reality that race has become weaponized. I don't know if you remember, maybe 2 years ago, it was during the pandemic, that an African-American man was bird watching in Central Park in New York, minding his own business, and a white woman was walking her dog, actually choking her dog on the leash. You know, I'm just like holding the dog up while she's on the phone saying, there's a black man who's threatening me. I feel unsafe. And the man was just like, ma'am, I'm not doing anything but watching birds. But blackness and darkness of skin has become a weapon and perceived as threat. And as a result of that, in your own region, some years ago, it happened in our city as well, a white man by the name of Charles Stewart murdered his wife and told the police that it was a homeless black man who did it. Guess who got arrested first? The black man. You fit the description. Later found out that he had murdered his own wife. That happened in my city as well, about 5 miles from where I live, maybe less than that. Years ago, there was a wonderful mall in a predominantly African-American community called Northridge Mall. You can Google it, Northridge Mall. And a white man named Jesse Anderson in the parking lot killed his wife, called the police and said, hey, help, send the police. There's a black man who just murdered my wife. And, you know, sounded real frantic and so forth, and later found out he had did it. But the history of that mall declined after that. People started leaving. Oh, you got to get out of this part of town. It's dangerous. The mall is closed and abandoned today. There's a history of missed opportunities for the church and for society. You all know Dr. Henry Louis Gates. And I heard, I wasn't here, I don't know, but I heard that even no matter how educated you are, you still black. And you still fit the description. And trying to go in his own house with his own house key was arrested, believed to be a burglar. So there are missed opportunities. And one other statistic that I found very interesting, there was a study done on the wealth gap here in this region. Can you put that wealth gap statistic up? Go on, follow me like 5 slides ahead. There we go. The color of wealth, non-immigrant African-American households in greater Boston. The wealth measurement is $8. $247,000 for whites, $12,000 Caribbean blacks, $3,020 for Puerto Ricans, 0 for Dominicans. And this is based not on how much they have saved minus their income, but it's subtracting their debt from their assets. Just some interesting statistics and a lot of things that I researched and for my own knowledge, because I'm not an expert. I'm learning. I'm a teacher. I'm a counselor. I also found that you have your own museum that a lot of these facts and history are in. Even I found in this museum, the Lynn Museum, that the greater Boston area was the first city in America that allowed black people to vote. It's called the Negro Election Day. Negro Election Day. We get to vote, right? But the person that was elected was kind of like a king just for black people in the city. Didn't really have any power other than that. So there's some opportunities for us today to make things right. Let me say this as well, because when we talk about justice and we talk about race, we start using muscles, not physically, but mentally and soulishly, that we normally don't use. And you know, the first time you decide you're going to work out, first time you decide you're going to run 5 miles, you do 5 blocks. Right? Because you're using muscles that you haven't used before. And those muscles like, hey, I'm not used to this. I'm pulling over. I'm pulling. So if you don't pull over, I'm going to pull. Right? You're going to pull a hamstring, a calf muscle, or something. When we start talking about race and justice, we're lifting some heavy stuff that we normally don't lift. And black people lift it every day. Now, this don't mean that we don't get tired. But it means that we've been working these muscles for 500 years in America, 600 years in America. So we have a larger capacity and stamina because we wake up having to deal with it, regardless of your education or your economic level or what you've achieved in life. Every day you walk out of the door, you're black. And we're living in a racialized society. But white people don't have to. You get to choose whether you want to be a part of this conversation or not. You get to choose because it's a privilege of being a part of dominant culture. But I want to say this as well. Y'all understand what I mean when I say the difference between being racialized and racism? Let me break that down, and I'll go deeper. Racism is a sin. Being racialized is a consequence of living in a race-based society. Racism is this. Racism is prejudice plus power. Racism is not just, I don't like you, I don't like your color, I don't like your culture. I don't care if people don't like me, right? But don't allow your prejudice to be mixed with power, so now I don't have to rent to you. I choose not to rent to you. Or I choose not to hire you. Or I choose not to give you the loan. See, now when you have power systemically that's married with the fact that I don't like, that's racism. It's prejudice plus power. We're going to go deeper after the break into that. But racism, I believe, racialization, so that's racism. Racialization is a result of living in a society that has racism. And racialization infects all of us, red, yellow, black, white, or brown. I don't believe that everybody is racist, but I believe everybody has been racialized. And how it manifests itself in different ethnic groups, it's different. For white people, it manifests itself that if you're not conscious and if you're not careful, you can develop a sense of entitlement and superiority. Like the woman who called the police on the man who was bird watching, right? She used her prejudice and her power. I got the power. I can call you and tell the police because I'm white that you're threatening me. But that's because she lived in a racialized environment. It's like living in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in the 60s where there were steel mills, a steel town, right? Pittsburgh Steelers. And imagine living next door to a steel mill. And you grew up in that household. Your father grew up in that household. Your grandfather grew up in that household. And every day, just, pollution's going up in the air. And they all worked, everybody in your family worked in the steel mill. And you, after 3 generations, have the audacity to say, you know what? We've all worked here and lived here our entire lifetime, but none of us have, pollution in our lungs. How is that possible? In the same way, it's impossible to live in a racialized nation, one in which race has been created to establish privilege for some and disparities for others, and systems that enforce that and government that backs that and say, I've lived in America all my life, and my father and my grandfather, and we've all lived and we've benefited from these privileges, but none of us have been racialized. I'm colorblind. I know what you mean by saying you're colorblind, but you're not really. We all have it in us. So how it manifests itself sometimes in Hispanic or Latino population is they often feel frustrated and invisible. As if you all are just saying that blacks and whites only have the history of dealing with race. What about us? Maybe it manifests itself in blacks where some feel like, hey, I'm angry. I'm going to take somebody out. First white person that says something to me, they're going to get it, right? That's being racialized. The anger might come out, or the sense of frustration, or maybe feelings of inferiority. That when a black person walks into an office of all white people, maybe they might feel, maybe I'm not as good as I think I am. So we all have the responsibility as believers of getting that cancer out of our lungs. Yes. because we've breathed it. We've drunk the water for years. It's in us. So how do we get it out? Well, that's another seminar. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that next time. But God has a dream, the power of a dream. God's dream is found in Revelation 7 and 9. That he would have a family made up of every tongue, tribe, nation, and language. That every ethnicity, every nation would be part of his family and gathered around his throne. In Matthew 28, our commission is to go into all the world and make disciples of the nations. The word nation is ethnos. That's God's vision. That's his dream. And he's left us here to do it, but we got to make sure that we're healthy, that we're right in order that we can do it. One of the things that we have to really dive into and understand is culture. The power of culture. I don't know if you've ever heard this statement. I defined culture earlier. It's what we do. It's music, food, clothing, how we talk, those kind of expressions. But culture eats vision and values for breakfast. Culture is important. Every organization has a culture. Every city has a culture. Lynn is a different culture than Boston, right? Every church has a culture. Every family has a culture. And if you don't know what the culture of your organization is, you are probably in the dominant group of that culture because you don't have to know it. It was created for you, so you don't have to be conscious of it. So if you want to know what it is, ask somebody who's in the minority. They'll tell you. But when they tell you, listen to them. Don't discount them. Don't rationalize it away. Oh, because I can't see it. I haven't experienced that. Well, it's for you then. It's not for me. The systems were built for your benefit and privilege, not for me. But culture eats vision and values for breakfast. It's important for us to understand culture. And to the degree that we increase our cultural competency, is to that same degree that we can greater impact every ethnicity to hear and participate in God's dream. Now, the lower our cultural intelligence, the more offense, the more bridges are going to be burned, walls are going to be built up, and people are going to reject us and the Jesus that's on the inside of us. What time is our break? Okay. Give me just a few more minutes and we'll take a break. So I want to take you on a quick journey of cultural competency. There's a school of thought called cultural intelligence. And the school of thought is that IQ gets you hired, but lack of CQ is what gets you fired. IQ, right? Intelligent. My intelligence quotient, right? That's what my resume tells you, how smart I am, what my experience has been. I don't care what your IQ is, that will get you in the door. But if you come in there and you don't have cultural intelligence, you're leaving, right? Because you are affecting the company's bottom line, because you're causing us to lose employees, causing us to lose customers, causing us to lose goodwill in the community. IQ gets you hired, CQ, lack of CQ gets you fired. And there's a wonderful book by David Livermore called 10 Cultural Clusters. And David Livermore is the executive director of an organization called the Cultural Intelligence Center. It's in the Grand Rapids, Michigan area. And what he has done is that he has looked over the globe, not just America, because the issue of justice and race is not just an American issue, it's global. We have to increase our cultural intelligence globally, not just locally. And he's identified 10 cultures or 10 cultural clusters, like the Nordic culture. I don't know if you all have IKEA stores here in the Boston area, but the IKEA stores is really that logo is really a symbol of the Nordic culture. It's one that symbolizes simplicity, minimalistic, functional, modesty. And so those who are generally from that background, those are some of the values: humility, equality in society. Those are Nordic values. He identifies Anglo values. Now, these are generally white people from Ireland, New Zealand, the United States, the UK, Europe, Australia. The icon he uses to identify Anglos is deodorant. Because hygiene is important to many people that are from these Anglo cultures. And personal space is important to them. Now I understand why they're suburbs. Now I understand why white people move away from townhouses and row houses and projects. They got to have space. It's a cultural value for Anglos. Now I understand why colonization was birthed out of this desire for space. It's a very individualistic as opposed to a collectivist culture. Collectivist cultures are like, we need to have a meeting and decide to make sure everybody's in consensus. Individualistic is that, hey, if I want it, I'm going for it. I'm a committee of one. Then there's Latin culture that he looks at, and Latin Europe culture in particular. I'm not talking about Latin American or Southern America, but Latin European culture is one of the clusters he looks at. This is like France and Italy and Spain and Portugal, and the icon is fine dining. And when McDonald's went to these countries to try to establish a foothold, they had a hard time. Because in this culture, it's important to dress properly, to go and sit down in the restaurant, have your first course, have your second course, have your third course, have your fourth course, maybe your fifth course. And McDonald's is like, put it in a box, put it in a bag, give me some, condiments, and I'm going. And so what they did, McDonald's began gradually adjusting, and they make that McDonald's kind of look like houses. And the younger culture, here they like to go to Dunks. Wisconsin like to go to Starbucks. It's like it's the end thing. You feel something when you're paying $5 for a regular cup of coffee. It's like I'm part of a community. But what they did over there, young folks go to McDonald's, but they sit down and eat. Very few are drive-through or just grab it and go. He talks about Asian Confucian culture. China, Japan, Singapore, South Korea. The icon is chopsticks. There's a widespread use of chopsticks that's associated with Confucian. And unlike the fortune cookie takeout carton Chinese restaurants that we have in America, that's not the case in these Asian countries. It's sit down. And if you want to go up higher in the rung of relevance in these cultures, learn how to use chopsticks. And don't drop your chopsticks, because that's like a bad taboo. Don't ask for silverware. I'm from America. I'm not going to eat no chop. Give me a fork and a knife and a spoon. Okay, that's like, okay, this dumb American is here again. Probably wants it in the to-go box with a fortune cookie. We don't do fortune cookies in Asian countries. It's an American thing. He talks about the sub-Saharan African cluster. Ghana, Kenya, Namibia, Nigeria, Zambia, Zimbabwe. And I know you all know this, but Africa is not a country, it's a continent. Yes. It's 52 countries. And there's a culture, and the icon is Ubuntu, which means that I am because we are. We are better together. It's a collectivist culture. To illustrate this, there was an anthropologist who proposed a game to a group of kids in an African tribe. He put a basket full of fruit at the bottom of a tree and came back about 100 yards, spoke to the kids and said, hey kids, we're going to have a race. I want you all to stand up. Whoever is the first person to run and reach that tree, you get the basket of fruit. He said, okay, on your mark, get ready, get set, go. All the African kids grabbed hands and they walked together towards the tree. Because they were practicing the culture of Ubuntu. I am because we are. If I win, we all win. That's why many Africans in America, when they come here, they're sending money back home. That's why African students struggle sometimes when they come and they go to college and they're in a dorm room by themselves. They're like, man, I'm not used to this. I need some people in this room with me. I need to eat with somebody. I need to have somebody sleeping on the floor, somebody on the bunk next to me, sharing a bed with somebody. It's part of the collectivist culture. It's not a competitive culture. It's a cooperative culture. He goes on to talk about many others, but what I want you to understand is that culture eats vision for lunch. Now, those that are part of the majority culture don't have to exegete, don't have to consider other cultures. And that's why there's been walls built and bridges burned, because we see it in all of society. We see it in media. We see it in videos that illustrate insensitivity towards minority ethnic cultures. Things that are really kind of born out of this mythology of the rightness of whiteness. We see it in even Disney cartoons, like the Aristocrats had a cat with slanted eyes and buck teeth, a racist character of an East Asian. Even the famed Mickey Rooney, dressed up in over-culturalization, exaggeration of stereotypical traits. Dumbo included a group of crows that were paying homage to the racist minstrel shows, like as if the crows were wearing blackface and talking in a southern, extreme southern dialect. The Aunt Jemima brand of pancakes was dissolved after the murder of George Floyd because Quaker Oats said, hey, we're contributing to stereotypical behavior of culture. So it's now called Pearl Meal. My wife can make some pancakes, y'all. And it's Pearl Meal now. You can't get Aunt Jemima anymore. The names have been changed. And on and on and on are expressions. Now let me close by this and we can take a break. I believe that most people in the world, most people in America, most people that are in churches, they're not racist. They don't identify with David Duke and the KKK. They don't identify with supremacist organizations. Now, there are probably some that do. I believe that most people are not. They reject that. But we all have been racialized. And we all should wake up every morning thanking Jesus that he has washed us from our sins, that we're on our way to heaven. But as long as we are down here in this environment, we have a duty, we have a job every day. I got to get that cancer out of my lungs. Every day I need to find a way, and it's not just through prayer, it's not just through scripture reading, but there are things that we can do. We'll talk about that a little bit more in